Just wanted to thank the Glow Girls for a really beautiful morning tea. They probably can't hear us because they're out the back. Oh, Nicole's here. But again, they punch well above their weight in terms of kingdom service, and they seem to infuse a lot of the ministries of the church in a variety of ways. And it's really great, I think, just to acknowledge our mothers and how special they are and the high calling that they have on their lives direct from God. I'd just like to honour my own mother, because I don't think I would probably be up here preaching if she hadn't brought home the reality of God to me in a variety of ways. So I just wanted to do that. I wanted to preach a sermon about the sermon in about 30 seconds. Basically, when you come to the Word, and in terms of what we've been learning about in I am the light of the world and seeing and blindness and so forth, I think the way that we see God and the way that we see each other is often flawed and distorted, and so we don't see things rightly. But the cruel thing about it is we think we are. And so when we go through this passage today, I just want you to know that this is about seeing rightly the most important thing, or more precisely, the most important person in the whole universe. So I may not even get it exactly right, but I just want you to know that I kind of have been feeling more and more the weight of seeing things rightly, of understanding things rightly, and most particularly of understanding God, understanding Jesus, understanding the Holy Spirit rightly, so that I can understand everything rightly. Because as we've said many times in this church, the way God sees things is the way things really are. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know that. And to ask this question to begin with: what makes you think you can see? And often we ask questions that are rhetorical, they kind of sound good and you get you thinking. But I actually want to know, what is it that makes you think you can see? Or to put it another way, what are you relying on for sight or for light? What frame of reference, what value system, what experience, what peer group pressure, what are you relying on for sight or for light? Like in the Bible, it's really important to understand when we talk about light or sight, it's referring to seeing evil things as evil and seeing good things as good. Or, again, more precisely, seeing who is good, who is evil, and understanding. Because oftentimes we might go, yeah, that person is good, or they've done something good, but they actually haven't. We're blind at that time. Conversely, we might say that is evil, and that person is evil. That person is a sinner, as we're going to see in this passage. That is not seeing either. You're blind in that moment. And obviously this whole passage is about blindness, but it's a particular type of blindness. And what we want to keep asking ourselves, I guess, as we go through this is, well, how am I seeing? Am I seeing rightly? Am I seeing correctly? And we're just going to keep asking that question as we go through and see this passage of a man who was blind in a physical sense. He was also blind in a spiritual sense to the reality of who Jesus was. And slowly, light got not only into his eyes so that he could see, but into his soul so he could see. And then at the same time, there was another group of people who thought they were seeing rightly, and they became more and more blind, more and more hard. So what are we relying on for sight? That's sort of the key question that I want to ask today. And you might think, yeah, I'm seeing this passage, I'm seeing John chapter 9 rightly, but what about the spit? What do you think about the spit? Right? It's disgusting. I knew Camille would say that because I was forewarned by Ben. Yes, I was. Now the guy, if you think about it, the guy would have every reason to see the spit as wrong. Like, he could have gone, what are you doing, Jesus? And I just want to spend just a little bit of time in the story before we go further. And Tim did a great job last week, and I'm going to leverage off a lot of what he has said. But he brought us into the story so well. Now, if you're a blind guy, you're a sufferer, aren't you? You suffered your whole life in one way or another. And now you've got Jesus coming along, and he puts spit into onto the dirt that's in his hand, okay? And he puts it on the man's eyes. Now, if we're seeing things correctly, well, just think of a blind man. Imagine if one of you were blind and I came and did that to you. I had Gabby help me with some of this, and she goes, "Oh, Dad, you can't do this. Don't put that up there." But, like, it's in the Word, isn't it? Lots of things are in the Word, and I get that. We don't need to put everything up there. But I'm doing it for a reason, because when you're looking at it, you're going, "That's wrong. That is wrong." But that is what would have happened. And I dare say the disciples were looking, going, "That is wrong." And when the blind man felt... Sorry, they're all like dancing crazily out there. I didn't know we were that kind of church, but that's good. Bring more of that. No banners, though. We want no banners. Anyway, now I've lost it. But you go, "That's wrong." Well, there's a value system that's at work here. There's a way of seeing, okay? Now, this man, he could easily have gone, "How dare you? How dare you do that? How dare you mock me?" And the thing is, his suffering wasn't over. Like, it wasn't actually an instantaneous miracle, was it? I know there must have been probably maybe a kilometre or more for him to get to from where he was to the pool of Siloam. He wasn't near the pool of Siloam. So for a whole bunch of time, he's walking in darkness, stumbling maybe. And we're told later on that his neighbours take him to see the Pharisees because they're not even sure if it was the blind man or whatever. So we don't even know how he got to the pool of Siloam. It doesn't appear that it was his neighbours that helped him. It doesn't appear that it was his friends that helped him. So he probably stumbled, tripped and so forth. His suffering was still going on. And all he had was spit and mud on his eyes and the word to go. But something in his heart said, "This is right. I'll do it." Everything in the world should have said, "No, this is crazy. Stay sitting. Maybe you'll earn some more money today if you beg. Don't go. You're going to fall. You're going to trip." All he had was a word, "Go," and that's what he had to do. Now, if you think about spit, I did some research. It's 99.5% water, guys. So, I know. So 0.5% is what's disgusting you. The 0.5 is just electrolytes and mucus and antibacterial compounds and so forth. But the really interesting thing here is you've got water, earth, and light coming. Does that ring any bells for you? Does it sound a bit like creation? You've got water, the Holy Spirit hovering over the waters. Then you've got, let there be light. You've got earth, and you've got us being created out of the earth. So there's something creative going on here. We don't know what was wrong with his eyes, but he was born blind. So it was probably some congenital thing. Might have even been born without the right equipment. Might not have had an optic nerve. We don't know. But whatever the miracle was, it was incredible that a man born blind could suddenly see. And the other thing that's really interesting in terms of, the whole spit thing is that if I spat at you, is that a compliment? No, it's a disgusting thing to do. It's a curse. It's an insult. Remember, Jesus at the cross, they spat at him. But isn't it interesting that when even Jesus' spit, which should have been a curse, becomes a blessing? I don't know. I just love the symbology of that. But as we're going to see as we go through the rest of this story, we're going to see a bunch of people that are seeing in certain ways. We're going to see the blind man who's seeing, and light is coming. And I want to keep asking, what and how are we seeing things when it comes to God, Jesus, the Spirit? How are we seeing things? Now, you remember the story, don't you? And I've already gone through some of it. The four-opper thing, I'm going to talk about that a bit later. But the man gets the mud. It's on his eyes. He has to walk some distance. Maybe he was led. We don't know. He gets to the pool of Siloam. And when he gets to the pool of Siloam, he washes. And we're told in the text that he comes home seeing. Now, I want to ask this question is, what did he see in all that time? From when Jesus, all he heard was his words, he doesn't see Jesus' face, what did he see? He saw nothing, right? Nothing. So he's going along just with that word. He gets to the pool of Siloam. What is the first thing that he would have seen, do you reckon? Can we just close our eyes for a minute? I'm not going to creep you out or anything, but just close your eyes, because we can get in this story really easily. What you're seeing now with your eyes closed is what he saw. For 30 years, probably more, what he saw as he stumbled along trying to get to the pool of Siloam, that's what he saw. Just keep your eyes closed for a minute. All he had was the word. That's all you guys have got too, The word to go, the word to obey, the word to trust. That's all he had. Eventually he gets to the pool. He's still not seeing. There's steps that have to go down to the pool. You know, you would feel the water around you. You would lean down. You would, maybe scoop the water up onto your hands. And something in you is daring to hope. You've been told by this voice of the Master, this voice of the Son of God, but it's still just, as far as you know, so far a man's voice, but there's something in you, something is just expectant. Now, what is the first thing you see? You'll wipe the mud, you've probably still got mud around your eyes, open your eyes now, and the first thing you see are the waters of the pool of Siloam. You see the waters there. So for the first time in your life, you're seeing contrast, colour, shape. You don't even have a frame of reference to compare what you're seeing. Now, you guys, as you grow, you're not only seeing things, but you're going, okay, that's that big, a mountain's this big, and that's that colour, roses are red, violets are blue, or purple, whatever colour. That's all building a frame. He has none of that. People have told him that mountains are big, and that red roses are red, maybe, if they had roses there. But he doesn't know what that looks like. He's got no experience of that. He's just been told that's what it looks like. Maybe no one even bothered to describe how things are. And he sees the pool of Siloam. That's what he sees, the first thing he sees. And I love this pool of Siloam thing. It's just, don't you love the way you can pick up your Bible, you can go and Google something, and you'll find archaeology. So, I don't know if you know much about the pool of Siloam, but it was originally fed by a 600-metre tunnel built by Hezekiah, fed by a spring. And you can see the tunnel there in the middle, right through rock. And the slide on your right there, that is the actual pool. That's the steps. How cool is that? They're the steps that blind man went down. They've dated it to about that time. I don't know, I get kind of tingles just thinking about it. Now, you might think as well that the pool of Siloam is small, and for some time they had discovered a pool before 2004, which they thought was the pool of Siloam. It wasn't, it was just a little retention basin thing. The actual size of the pool is here. This is the best they can do with a bit of an artist's rendition. As you can see, it was like a swimming pool, and in fact, one of the commentators believes that it may well have been used as a swimming pool. It was also used for ceremonial cleansing and washing. So when that blind man goes down those steps, he's actually standing in water. He's scooping the water up, and the first thing he sees is the pool of Siloam. Now, what's the symbology of that? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But for the first time in his life, he sees. For the first time in his life, he sees colours, shapes. He sees faces. I wonder if when he went back to his village, it was like, oh, so that's what you look like. I was expecting something a bit better. Trees. He sees his first sunrise, his first sunset. Can you imagine that? Seeing the sunrise. How do you describe a sunrise to a blind man? You can't, really, can you? And not do it justice. All he had was the word, guys. All he had was the word, go. All he had was maybe some idea of what the sunrise would be like a sunset, but now he's seeing it. He's seeing images of colour, he's seeing shapes, trees, faces. He's seeing his neighbours, and he sees some other things as well. Because the rest of the story must be within days, from verse 13 onwards. It must be within days that he ends up with the Pharisees. And so we're going to pick up the story. I'm just going to go through it section by section. The story is set up in a number of scenes, a number of interactions with the Pharisees. And so the blind man has seen all that stuff, and now he's seeing the effects of the miracle on his eyes on people, on the religious leaders of the time, the good church-going folk of the time, the good church-going leaders of the time. And so we just pick up the story in verse 13. And I want you to note that the first thing, it's an irony, John loves irony, is that what the blind man sees is blind men. Blind men. Remember how I said seeing who is right, seeing who is wrong, seeing who is good, seeing who is evil? Well, they are seeing Jesus as evil. They are seeing Jesus as a sinner. So there's this amazing irony that the blind man who can now see physically is now confronting blind men. And isn't it interesting that out of all the times in John, except for at the start, Jesus isn't even in this story. He's only at the start and he's only at the end. And so what you're seeing here is something invisible happening in the man's soul as he begins to see more and more, and something invisible happening but not intangible, you can pick it up through the text, happening in the Pharisees. So verse 13, they, which were his neighbours, the blind man's neighbours, brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. Formerly blind. Now it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And you know where we could go from here. They hated the fact that he had done work on the Sabbath. If you made clay on the Sabbath, you had broken the Sabbath rule. So they're going, oh, well, you made mud and clay. And now that wasn't a God rule, that was a man rule. And they were trying to apply it to God. Verse 15, then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can such a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was division amongst them. Just think about that. It's just incredible, isn't it? Shouldn't they have been going, whoa, you can see? Really? Far out. You were blind for so long. Whoa, wouldn't you be, yeah, sure, how did it happen? We'd be saying that. But they're not saying how did it happen so they can give thanks or praise or stuff like that. What they're actually saying is, we want to get this Jesus. We want to prove to you that he's a sinner, and we're going to do it no matter what. They are blind to who Jesus is. The whole Sabbath thing was just a joke. Like, it's just ridiculous. And this is what you need to be aware of, guys. You might come up with the best argument in the world. Is there any better argument than a 30-year man, a man 30 years blind, seeing? Is there any better argument than that? And you might go, oh, well, there's false signs out there and we've got to be careful, the devil does that. There's no record of a man 30 years blind ever in the Bible being made to see by the devil, okay? And actually they say this has never been done before. And I'm not saying there aren't false signs and things like that out there, but this is not one of them. And the Pharisees should have known better. But instead, they see Jesus as a sinner. How can, in verse 16, a man who is a sinner do such things? Already in their discussions, they're discussing that Jesus is a sinner. That's his category. That's what he is. We don't care that you can see. That's where we're coming from. That's how they are seeing, and they are just blind. They're blind. So that's the first thing that the blind man sees, or the man who was formerly blind. He says blind men all around him. Now, everything in this journey of faith for this guy, as he begins to see Jesus more and more, everything around him is actually militating against his faith growing. Do you see that? He's got the most religious, the most learned, the most erudite men around him saying, this guy that healed you, he's a sinner, he's no good. He should have been going, well, these guys are my religious leaders, these are my religious mentors, maybe they're right, maybe I do need to think elsewhere. But he just saw a sunrise. And is he looking at the Pharisees going, oh, I can see your beard, I can see your eyes are brown, and I can see the texture of the walls. You know what I mean? Like that argument of all the stuff that they bring out, it's just so small and ridiculous because of the experience that he's had. And I do see like a parallel in us, like God does something in our hearts and it's like all this stuff comes against us. Maybe it's, pseudo-scientific kind of rationales. Maybe it's, the world, we know we all crawled out of primordial sludge heaps billions of years ago. It takes a lot of faith to believe that. But hey, there's smart guys saying it, smarter than me or you. And yet there's this burning, I think, in our hearts, or even just a warmth, or just an acknowledgement, no, this is not right. There is something about Jesus. We've got his word. Don't give up on his word. Don't give up on that word at all. Don't let blind men lead you. Do you know what happens when blind men lead us? Jesus talked about it. They'll lead us into a hole. They'll lead us into a pit. The next thing that the blind man saw, after this, the next thing that he saw, and it says there in verse 17, was that Jesus was a prophet. Now, he's just articulating this in verse 17. They said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him? Because he opened your eyes." And he said, "He is a prophet." Is the blind man seeing correctly there? Is Jesus a prophet? Yes, absolutely. Is he seeing comprehensively? Is Jesus just a prophet? No, he's way more than a prophet. And if you go back into the passage, you'll see that originally the man who was born blind and the man who can see now, he talks about Jesus being a man. So you can see a bit of a progression developing, all right, on this journey of faith. First, he's just heard Jesus' voice. He talks about him as the man who made him see. Now he says in verse 17, he's a prophet. And he's not just saying it to his mum and dad or to his neighbours. He's saying it in the heat of the questioning. And he knows, as you'll see in the next few verses, that if he gets to the point where he goes, this guy is really cool, he is Christ, he is the Messiah, he is God, he can be thrown out of the synagogue. He knows that already. As we're going to see with his parents shortly, they know that too. And yet, in the face of that, he says something very positive. He says, Jesus is a prophet. He is a prophet. Can you see this progression of faith? His eyes are slowly being, his physical eyes have already been opened, but now his spiritual eyes are being opened to who Jesus really is. It's not enough just to think of Jesus as a good man or as a prophet. We've got to get further than that. But he's well on the way. He's on the right trajectory. What's the next thing that the blind man sees? He sees unbelieving men. Now, I'm not even talking about the big scale unbelief. I'm just talking about they don't even believe that he was blind. Verse 18, the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight. See, for them to believe that, they then have to deal with who Jesus is, with Jesus' power. So it's far easier to argue that maybe this isn't really the guy. And earlier on, even his neighbours, because when a blind man can see, something so startling has happened to his appearance, something so radically different, like his neighbours are going, oh, we're not sure if this is the guy. So this is an argument that the Pharisees can tap into. Well, maybe this isn't the guy. You know, these masses of people, they've got no idea, they're ignorant, they don't read the Torah like we do. We know. So maybe this guy isn't even blind. Like the unbelief of these guys, their way of seeing is becoming so ingrained in their heart that even this fact before them, this living, breathing, testifying fact, the man born blind, it's not enough for them. It's not enough. And so the blind man is confronted with unbelieving men all around him. What's the next thing that he sees? Sadly, the next thing that he sees is his parents. Verse 18. And I want to argue that they were in one way blind. We can't be sure whether they believed that Jesus was the Messiah or Jesus was the Christ. We know that they would have believed that Jesus had healed their son, but they are not at a point where they're willing to confess that Jesus is the Christ. Verse 18, but the Jews did not believe concerning him, the blind man, that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they said, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? And his parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him and he will speak for himself. Verse 22, his parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. And so they said, he is of age, ask him. So they did not want to confess that Jesus is the Christ because they're going to be chucked out of the synagogue. And to be chucked out of the synagogue meant you had a whole bunch of relationships that were important to you severed. You would be ashamed, basically a walking case of shame around anyone that had been in the synagogue in your local area. They weren't willing to pay that price. But inadvertently, they've actually confirmed for the Pharisees that this is indeed the man that was born blind. Parents should know. And they can't deny it anymore. So now they're going to have to take a different trajectory. But just consider for a minute, because the man's there, you'll see that shortly. He's there listening to his parents. Okay? And again, another reason for him to go, well, my parents aren't even acknowledging it. Maybe I just need to kind of just play this one safe, play it neutral. I can see after all, got what I wanted. I'm good. Again, things are militating and working against his faith journey. And yet, something's still happening, as we're going to see, because what's the next thing that he sees? What's the next thing that happens? Accusing men. Sooner or later, guys that are frustrated, guys that in their head have said, no, this is the way things are, and then slowly but surely they're proven incorrect, especially if they're smart guys, especially if they're experienced guys. They're way up the ladder in terms of biblical acumen, in terms of respect. They've got a lot further to fall, therefore a lot more reasons to not be proven wrong. What are they going to do now? Well, they're not just going to pound the table or pound the facts. They're going to start pounding the guy. That's going to happen very, very shortly. Verse 24, they again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. We know this man is a sinner. So they're accusing Jesus of being a sinner. There it is. Give God the glory. That's just a bit of a saying. It was almost a cliche back then as, hey, you better be serious about what you're about to say. Verse 25, he answers and says, I love this answer. There's a bit of humour that's coming through here shortly. Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I know, I was blind and now I see. Shouldn't that be enough? Then they said to him again, well, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And verse 27, I love this bit. Do you like this bit? He answered them, I told you already and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? A little bit of bolshiness there, I think. Like, wouldn't you be getting frustrated? I can see, guys. I can see. I don't know. I just kind of think that's cool. Accusing men. And still this faith journey is progressing. Like, he won't deny Jesus. He won't deny what Jesus has done. What an amazing testimony. What's the next thing that he sees? Once they've gone from accusing, guess what happens next? Reviling. They hurled insults at him, verse 28. That's literally, they reviled him. Kind of comes from a Greek word that means it's got like a point. And you're jabbing and stabbing at someone. You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. They bring that one out all the time. John doesn't ever bother to actually refute it in his gospel because he knows in the other three gospels it is refuted. They're saying you're from Nazareth, the Messiah doesn't come from Nazareth, blah, 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 blah. If they'd bothered to check, if they'd bothered to get outside their little kind of hard-hearted paradigm and just gone and asked some people, they would have found out Jesus was born where? Bethlehem, we celebrate it all the time. But no, it's just like, no, we know where he's from. He can't be the Messiah. That's their one argument, and it's just not even... See what happens when you're just caught up in your own little construct, in your own little way of seeing? You won't even investigate the facts properly. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. And then the way the guy answers is just brilliant in the next few verses. He says, the man answered, now that is remarkable. It's like this, you can see the sarcasm. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. It's so interesting because out of his witnessing, feeling, I can see things, paradigm, the blind man just answers so beautifully. Like I just want us to see very clearly here that when you're put under pressure, with the power of the Holy Spirit, with God working through you, you can refute, you can befuddle, is that a word? You can confuse people that are way smarter than you in a good way. You can get them to question. Now, the guy didn't sit there and think through his apologetics 101 as he thought. You know, he didn't have any of that. He didn't have Lee Strobel's book. He didn't have any of that stuff. But you see, it's so brilliant because instead of focusing on Moses and going, well, Moses this, Moses that, all he goes in verse 32 is, nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. Did Moses ever do that? No, he never did. I can't remember him healing anyone. He did. Obviously, all the curses on Egypt came through him. But the guy just, again, directs it to the power of this miracle, to the power of the miracle giver. And he says, we know that God doesn't listen to sinners. Now, I'm glad that God does listen to sinners in one way. He listens to humble sinners, sinners who repent, sinners who come to him. But he doesn't listen to people who will blindly continue to see him as anything less than he is, continue to act as though they know, deliberately deceived maybe. He doesn't listen to people like that. And he doesn't listen in a way that we see he listened to Jesus with power. Remember what Jesus said, I only do what my Father tells me to do. And so when we see Jesus saying here, the man saying here, God does not listen to sinners, he listens to the godly person who does his will. He sticks it right back at the Pharisees to say, well, you explain it. How can you possibly explain it? That's why there's sarcasm. This is remarkable. What's remarkable is the fact, there's one remarkable thing about how the man can see, and there's the other, you see the antithesis of that, the remarkable things that these guys won't see. It's such a warning for us. If we will continue, and this is what happens with these guys, if we will continue to deny the facts, if we will continue to look at Jesus and see him as anything less, if we think he's a sinner, we think he's that, we think this or that, or maybe just more subtly but still as seriously, we think he's not with us. I know some of you sometimes are barely holding on. Sometimes I feel like I'm barely holding on. Sometimes all you've got is that word, like Camille just shared so beautifully before. All you've got is words. And yet you feel like your soul's being stripped bare and you feel like everything is against you and you feel like this pain or whatever it is. But if you are still holding on, if God is who he says he is, then he's going to get you to the pool of Siloam. He's going to get you to where you will see him as he really is and you will see that first sunrise, the real sunrise. I just want to encourage you there. And at the same time, I want to warn you, you think you know? You think you're seeing? Be very careful, because they thought they were too. What's the next thing that he sees as we work through the passage? Shunning men. Verse 34. To this they reply, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. To have the doors of the church closed on you, that's a terrible thing. Terrible thing. And all over the internet at the moment, there is stories of what they're calling spiritual abuse, where people have been shunned from the church when they shouldn't have. Some very high-profile things going on. Now, I get the idea of church discipline, I do, where if someone's saying, yeah, I'm a Christian, I'm with you, and then they're sleeping around or they're doing this or doing that, well, you're not. You're not actually acting like a Christian in that moment. And maybe there does need to be some church discipline. But to shun people because they're concerned about genuine things that God himself is also probably concerned about, you'd better be very careful, very careful. These men here, they just ratchet up their sin every time they throw this guy out. All he did was give a testimony. He has said nothing false, nothing untrue. And what his parents feared for them has happened to him. He has been shunned, thrown out of the church, doors closed on him. That's what it literally means. They threw him out. They excommunicated him. And notice the insult, because this is where it all started. You remember at the start of where Tim took us? What were the disciples talking about with the guy and his family? Who sinned? This man or his parents? Now, just pretend you're blind again, and I come up and I've got a few, Mary followers. The next thing, the Mary followers, and maybe even me, we're going, so who's the sinner here? Family or the guy? Well, is that insulting? Like, I know having, I've got disabled people in my family, I know that often they're invisible. People want to ignore them. And sometimes we even talk as though they're not there. What an insult. I just pray that we as a church will always, one, acknowledge that people are there. And if you're going to start saying, oh yeah, sinners and all that kind of stuff, just acknowledge, one finger, three fingers pointing back. We're all sinners, so theologically they were very correct. You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? They're actually theologically correct. We are all steeped in sin. There's something in us that wants to gravitate towards sin. Naturally put a group of human beings on an island, leave them by themselves. They won't turn good. Read Lord of the Flies, Let's Kill Piggy. They won't turn good, they'll turn awful. It's only by the grace of God that there's any sort of goodness on us as we bear his image. So they're theologically correct, but they're still comprehensively wrong about how they've applied it. And they're tying into the insult. They're doing exactly the same thing as what the disciples did, except they've put a cutting edge to it and thrown the guy out. How awful. And again, he could have gone, this is too much. I need to settle down here. But I love this next bit. Who finds who here in verse 35? Verse 35, Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Now just think for a moment, because if you go back chronologically, Jesus has already nearly had stones thrown at him. Okay? So at risk of his own life, he hears, once he's heard that this has happened, what does he do? He goes for him. He goes for the man. I love that because he's coming for us as well, guys. He won't leave you. He won't forsake you. That's his promise. He's coming for you. Do you believe in the Son of Man? That literally means, do you trust? Are you holding on? Belief in John is always a verb. It's a doing word. Do you believe in the Son of Man? He ties into that spectacularly magnificent, sovereign term for Jesus, Son of Man. Do you know where Son of Man comes from? Daniel. The book of Daniel, where the throne room of heaven is opened up to Daniel and he sees the angels, he sees God, and he sees the Son of Man. So when Jesus says, do you believe in the Son of Man? It's like, literally, do you believe in that? And the man says, who is he? Tell me so that I may believe in him. This is a very poetic moment, a very powerful storytelling moment. Because he's like, Jesus is right there. And he has, but the blind man hasn't seen his face yet. Like I kind of see for us, one day when, heaven's thrown open for us, but when we've never seen Jesus' face, have we? So he's going to probably have to, I don't know, okay, there's an angel, there's no, whoa, who's that? Oh, right. I don't know how it all works, but just think about that. Again, he's never seen Jesus' face. Jesus comes for him. Yes.
Do you reckon he would have recognised his voice at all? Because you know how people
Yeah.
who have one sense dull.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Yeah. So Camille was just saying, do you think he would have recognised? Because the senses that... No, I think it's a good thought because the other senses are actually heightened. Maybe. He doesn't seem to though because he says here, tell me so that I may believe him. Maybe he's recognised but he's just not 100% sure, Because again, he's still getting used to having eyes, But I just love the way that, and again, that's such a good point because by himself, he probably wouldn't recognise him. Jesus had to come for him. Jesus always has to come for us, I guess. But then verse 37, he says, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. And then 38, the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Now, what a beautiful progression. Back in verse 11, he sees Jesus as a man. In verse 17, he sees Jesus as a prophet. In verse 27, as one from God, a man of God. And then verse 38, Son of Man, Lord, worshipping. It's like voice of Jesus on this man, the word of Jesus, the effect he could see, and then prophet to God. And I just find a lot of comfort and encouragement in the fact that it is a process because we're all on that process. In a sense, Jesus has washed us clean. We see in a way, but we don't see fully. We don't see him as he really is in all of his glory. And so he has to, in a sense, come for us. He's going to have to keep coming for us because by ourselves we will end up maybe just stopping at prophet, maybe even turning around, giving up. And the best prayer that you can pray, I think, is just, Lord, help me to see. Because there are many things that make us think we can see. We are making judgments all the time about other people, about ourselves. And oftentimes we're just blind. And so when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, it is all about seeing correctly and seeing rightly. What are you relying on for your sight? Because if you're relying on anything else than Jesus, his Spirit, his word, particularly and most importantly about the things of God and and God's character, God's personality, if we're relying on other things, then we're going to get it wrong. We're going to say, this is evil, this spit is awful, this spit thing. I don't even get the spit thing myself. But for the man, it was his means of seeing. He didn't get to argue about, do you really have to use the spit? We can easily go in our own life, this is crazy, this hurts, this is not right. But do we really get to say that? God's given you the word. He says go. He's given you light. Just walk by the light that you have which is the light of God. I just wanted to finish off the sermon with a couple of more personal comments, I guess. And what was the blind man relying on? Well, he was relying on the word and the voice. That's all you're relying on. You got nothing else. Nothing else. So, yeah, a very practical encouragement is read your Bible. We're always going to be saying that kind of thing in this church. But please don't read it just to learn a bunch of stuff. Read it to get the description of the face of Jesus. Because the light of the gospel, of the glory of Christ in the face of God, that's what it is. It's about the face of God. It's about the presence of God. It's about the relationship you have with God. And that leads me to this other question, which is like, what are you waiting to see in your Christian walk? What are you waiting to see? And what I want to tie this into is the blind man. The blind man was waiting to see everything, of course. He was waiting to get sight. But that sense of expectation that he had, do we have that? What are you waiting to see in your Christian walk? We're told that when we see him, we will be like him. And everyone who has this hope in him purifies themselves. That's what John said in 1 John. When we see him, we will be like him, because we shall see him as he is. Everyone who has this hope purifies himself or herself. Now think about that. There is something about that expectation of waiting to see the face of Jesus that is purifying. And if there's nothing else from this sermon, then just think, am I waiting for the face of Jesus? Am I waiting to see him? That might sound a bit cringy to you. But like if someone you really love, you want to see their face. If I was blind and I married my beautiful wife, who I can see out the back there, and everyone told me she was beautiful, and one day I had an opportunity and it's like, hey, you can see her if you want. I'd be like, yes, please. Because I know her so well. I feel I know her so well, but I've never seen her face. I'd like to see her face. There's something very personal about face, and it's so grand that the Bible would constantly encourage us to seek his face. The blind man was waiting for sight. But what are you waiting to see? Please wait and ask God to put that in you, to have that sense of expectancy. Now, I said this was for Oppa. No preaching is for a man. It's always for God. I get that. Okay? But I said I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my mum. I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my dad either, and the witness that he had. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my Oppa and my Oma. And my Oppa was a very godly man who, again, as with all my family members, imparted to me a sense of the reality of the face of God. What do I mean by that? A sense of the reality of the presence of Jesus in everyday life. That's what, half the time that is our issue. It's not the suffering, it's not the confusion, it's the fact that we don't feel God close to us. And I know that he always is close to us because that's what he's promised, but when you don't feel it, it's pretty much irrelevant. Keep going though. Keep going. But for my Oppa, he really imparted this sense to me when I was a bit of a rebellious, mullet-wearing teenager. And I'd go over to his place, and we'd often, he'd cut my hair because he used to be a naval barber, and he used to do other things too. We won't go into that, but anyway, because he was German. So he would cut my hair, and he'd just be talking about the Lord. And I don't remember most of the conversations. I just remember coming away with this real sense of, the reality of God. This Jesus he talks about is real. And that picture you can see up there is my Oppa's Bible, because one of the best things I got when he died in 2005 was his English Bible. We had a German as well. And there were just notes all the way through it. And while I was preparing my sermon for today, I noticed on the bookshelf the Bible, his Bible. I hadn't opened it up for a while, and I thought, I'll just open it up to John 9. And there it is there. That's his annotations. He was a man who struggled a lot with his health. He had 7 pacemakers and many really bad scares with his heart. Like I remember several Christmases he was in hospital. And I just remember him really excited in 2004, a year before he died, because that was when he discovered that the pool of Siloam actually existed. And he said to me, Adrian, I just got this sense that if I was to go there, I'd be healed of his heart condition. And you might go, that's a bit silly, a bit of that kind of charismatic kind of talk going on there. But he really believed that. He really believed that God was saying, go. Now, he died a year later. He never went to the pool of Siloam. Okay, so here I am. I'm his grandson. And I don't know, I guess 10 years later, I'm preaching on the pool of Siloam. I'm preaching on the man who went there and was healed. And I'm just thinking to myself, how does this all go together? And the way it goes together is when I saw that word go. Like all my oppa had was God's word. As he then went into a time where his wife died, where he himself got leukemia. And, he had a great life, a fulfilling life, but he himself was always just waiting for the face of Jesus. And not only was he waiting for it, but when he thought that there was this command or admonition, it was like, we have to do it. We have to go because Jesus is real. And I don't know what your go is today, but I kind of get the feeling as I was preparing that there are many of you that have been told go in one way or another. And it might just be a little thing. It might have been a bigger thing. But I kind of get the feeling you haven't listened. Because I get the feeling in my own heart many times he's saying go, and I don't. And it could be go do this, go do that. The pool of Siloam literally means sent. We're all sent in a way. But I just want to, I guess, encourage you as you go away from this sermon to think and to ask, Lord, have you told me to go somewhere, do something, and I haven't done it? Would you please show me what that is? And know that he comes for you as well. This isn't a condemnatory thing. This is a hopeful thing. But if he has told you to go, if he's just told you to, just simple things in the church or around the place, please go, because he is so worth it. And one day, and I believe my oppa sees the face of Christ now, one day we're going to come home seeing. We're going to come home seeing. We're going to see for the first time. We're going to see the colours and the shapes and the contours and the contrasts of a new kingdom, of a new world. We're going to see faces and trees. We know there are trees in heaven, a river. We're going to see the first light of heaven. Our eyes are going to be open. And just like my oppa had to wait, and whatever that meant in the greatest fulfillment in heaven, to go to the pool of Siloam for him and to be completely healed, I know he's experienced that right now. And I know that we're going to experience a very similar thing one day. Images, colours, shapes, trees, faces, the face of Christ, light, rivers, neighbours, my oppa. We're going to see. And so in the meantime, though, please go if he's told you. Please do what he's asked you to do. Don't do it in your flesh. Ask the Lord for the Spirit. Ask him to show you, and let's walk in that kind of light. Let's see rightly. So I'm going to pray for us, pray for me, and then I think we're going to be led through a time of communion, which is also always very special, and then I think we'll be finishing off. So let's pray together.